Direction Point! Direction Point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason. I am back from my trip to London last week. It was phenomenal meeting Conrad. My apologies to Cy Hart. We were there to see Heathers the Musical on the West End. It is now off on a national tour for the next several months, and if you do have a chance to see that on the British Isles, definitely go see it. Comes highly recommended from here. This week we are talking about the Sensorites. Jon Arnold is back on the show to talk about it. The cover artist to the novelization is Nick Spender, who passed away recently. Jim Sangster had wanted me to mention that earlier on the show. I did not shortly after Nick Spender passed away, but I am making up for that here, and I will include a link to his obituary in the show notes. That's from February, so about 5 months ago. Jim also has some thoughts about the departure of Jacqueline Hill from Doctor Who. I had mentioned in last week's episode on the Space Museum about a memo found in the Season 2 Blu-ray production files talking about Verity Lambert thinking about replacing Jacqueline Hill. Now, Jim's theory is that it is not that Verity Lambert actually wanted to replace Jacqueline Hill, but that Hill was planning on moving on from the show. That eventually happened together with William Russell during the chase. Lambert was likely reacting to news that Jacqueline Hill wanted out, rather than actively considering to cut Barbara. I much prefer Jim's interpretation. Unthinkable to me that anybody would actively want to take Jacqueline Hill off the show, as amazing as she was. Jim also points out that Barbara herself is never actually replaced. Every female companion from there on until Liz Shaw is basically the vulnerable young woman model, Susan. Stephen replaces Ian, Dodo replaces Vicky, Polly replaces Dodo, etc., etc. Not until Liz Shaw do we get an independent female character with a career a little bit more established and not there solely to get into peril. Speaking of Blu-rays and production notes, it was announced this past week that Season 25, the second Sylvester McCoy season, is going to be the next released collection. I believe there's going to be about 5,000 pages of material in the BD-ROM archives, including several copies of draft scripts, as well as production notes for all 4 of those stories. I love the Blu-ray collections, and especially the BD-ROM archives. I do go through those very carefully. Very excited to digging into 5,000 pages of Season 25. Meanwhile, it's time to dig into the Sensorites. Let's get to it.
Traveling the Vortex.
Are you ready to embark on an epic journey through time and space? Join the thousands of Whovians around the world who've discovered Traveling the Vortex, the ultimate Doctor Who podcast for die-hard fans and curious newcomers alike.
Every week, we dive deep into the Whoniverse, discussing the episodes, theories, and hidden gems. We dissect the Doctor's adventures, share behind-the-scenes stories, and explore the legacy of this iconic show.
Traveling the Vortex brings fans together, fostering a global community of Whovians. Whether you're a fan of classic or new Who, there's something for everyone.
Join us on this incredible journey as we unravel the mysteries of time and space.
Don't miss out. Subscribe to Traveling the Vortex today on your favorite podcast platform.
Traveling the Vortex. Your ticket to adventure awaits.
Traveling the Vortex is a proud member of the Direction Point Podcast Network. You're listening to the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. Keep turning the pages.
And we're welcoming back to Doctor Who Literature a guest who has not been with us in almost a year. The last time you were on was to discuss Earthshock, book number 78, and now you're back 40 books later, or 40 book numbers later and 39 novelizations later for the Sensorites. Jon Arnold, welcome back to Doctor Who Literature.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be back.
So, I know we are connected on social media, so I'm familiar with the broad outlines of your life as shared socially, but in the 40 weeks plus since you've been on the show, what have you been up to, podcast-wise and professionally?
Mainly, I've been talking on Strangers in Space, covering everything from Doctor Who to fairly obscure European films. I've done a few with Ian Martin of We're All Stories in the End as well. A couple of new adventures. I pulled the same stunt I do with when Stacey Smith asked me for a piece. I go, what's the most obscure episode I can write on? Something interesting there.
I tend to do the same with Stacey for the Outside In books. I will take the most obscure or unloved stories that nobody else is going to want to write about, and that guarantees me a spot.
Absolutely. I just go, okay, if you want to dole them out first, because then people will pick the more loved stories, the more obvious ones, but they're the ones that are harder to find things to say about. You know, there are fewer angles on something like, say, Caves Van Zandt, Genesis dies than there are. In fact, with the story we're going to discuss tonight as well. I did the piece for Outside In 2 for the Sensorites.
Similarly, when Stacey and Graham released Who's 50, which is their book for ECW Press on the 50 Doctor Who stories to watch before you die, they had a contest through their publisher. What story not in the book would you include in the book and why? And the winner of the essay contest would get a free copy of the book. I was very sneaky, and I submitted an entry saying that I would include the Sensorites as one of my top 50. Not only that, I won the competition, and I got a free copy of the book. And when I asked Stacey and Graham how that happened, they were not even aware of my entry. But
oh, wow.
Somebody was very swayed by my writing style, and I got a free copy of their book.
And also, I suspect very, very few people went for the Sensorites or anything like that.
We'll get to it shortly. I am an apologist for the Sensorites. I think it's a great story with its heart in the right place, and it does have some production and pacing and acting problems, but I'm going to argue that the acting problems make the episode even better than it would have been had the actors just delivered the lines as written. But we'll come back to that. I have not been on the Ian Martin Stories podcast in about a year and a half, so I was there. I know he's going in alphabetical order, so I covered Camera Obscura, which is an Eighth Doctor adventure by Lloyd Rose, the American critic and writer. I seem to recall that you were going to cover Conundrum, which is the sequel to The Mind Robber, and one other book, but I can't remember what the other one was.
I've done 3. I did Conundrum, I did Christmas on a Rational Planet, and I just did this year, I think because he was going, I can't find anything to do them, Eternity Weeps and Frontier Worlds.
Okay. I know I've heard the first 2 of those episodes. My 2-month-long podcast backlog often prevents me from hearing everything timely.
Yes.
So Christmas on a Rational Planet, I would have read when it came out in 1996. I recall very little about it. Number one, apart from being wowed by Lawrence Miles's prose style, having no idea what else was going on. And I have a memory that he had a reference to every single Doctor Who classic series story somewhere in that book, either directly or obliquely.
I believe so. We did discuss that. I could find loads. It starts from about virtually the first line and goes right the way through. But the thing is, otherwise it's so original. It's so unlike anything else in Doctor Who, certainly to that point, that you don't notice it. You just go along with it. So I think Lawrence really did. It's a fantastic debut because it's so striking. It's set, I think it's 1776 it's set, I think.
I think it's in the 1790s in New York after independence. But he doesn't exactly say where in New York. And being a native New Yorker, I couldn't quite map over the geography.
Yeah, I suspect he didn't worry too much about the geography at that point. Just plug a pin in map. It's maybe somewhere like that. I'll put this village here. And it's the age of it's reason versus chaos. So it's very Lawrence in that sense. He's got that fascination with chaos. So it's a really interesting read. It's very much he wants to make an impression. And I think you can see he's kind of rooted in the comics of the 90s, certainly. I think particularly Grant Morrison, maybe a little bit of Alan Moore with the magic. And I think the only thing that's really horribly dated is its kind of attitude towards gender. It's which I don't think you can be that enlightened at that point, just as a standard white guy. but it's very much about male versus female and a binary kind of opposition on the pair. But if you can accept something that's dated like that, then there's a hell of a lot to love there. It's
and it
not
is, of course, a 30-year-old book. Things change rapidly in terms of social mores over any 30-year period. For example, the Sensorites has a casual ethnic slur, which I'm sure didn't strike anybody as being objectionable in 1987, but looking at it now, I can't believe he said that.
Oh God, it's unreal, isn't it? But then again, you're talking about a story that comes from the 60s as well, so it's kind of going with that period piece. The thing that struck me most about Sensorites is it's when Nigel Robinson's always trying to dramatise that kind of first scene where the TARDIS crew are chatting to each other as well. And there's the Doctor. He recalls their first meeting, and in the line, this is from the Doctor's point of view, and he said, Ian and Barbara, they came into TARDIS, and they met the intellectual giant known as the Doctor. So he's got a very high opinion of himself, which kind of does strike me as very Hartnell.
No, absolutely. Nigel Robinson is a tremendously important writer for The Range because as the editor, he was responsible for bringing back the novelizations of all these 1960s stories that much of the reading audience would never have seen. And he's largely responsible for bringing in the original writers. So you get voices like Glyn Jones in 1987 and William Evans may have been before his time, but just in 1987 alone, you have Glyn Jones coming back to adapt the Space Museum. You have Black Orchid written by its original writer, Terrence Dudley. You have The Mind Robber done by Peter Ling. You have The Ark done by Paul Erickson. And then later on, you're going to have Dennis Spooner coming. Sorry, not David. You're going to have Donald Cotton coming back to novelize Dennis Spooner's The Romans.
Which is such a brilliant choice.
Absolutely. It fits. So Nigel Robinson himself will novelize a book or two every year when the original author is somebody that we no longer have access to, or books that are perhaps less popular. So Nigel Robinson takes it upon himself to novelize The Sensorites, Underwater Menace. He does a finished job on The Rescue. He novelizes Edge of Destruction, and he does an amazing surgery job on that to bring it up to length. So he, kind of like you on the Ian Martin podcast, he's taking on books that are not the biggest, most exciting books in the range, but he's taking books that have flawed television stories, and he's fixing them for print and making surgical changes as he goes that makes the books arguably more memorable than the TV stories that he is adapting from scripts.
Particularly here, I think what he does, he uses the novel format to, he gets inside the head of the character, so everything kind of goes a little melodramatic with reactions, with the emotions. So, and you see, and he does, the Sensorite Society. It's from our point of view, it's kind of a Doctor Who Road Not Taken as a TV show. It's Doctor Who probably written more childish, the sort of thing that gets lost when you've got directions given by the Daleks, when they go, hang on, pulp sci-fi works better here in conjunction in Very Lambert's time with the historicals. And he delves into why the Sensorites do that a little, just emotionally. It makes a little more sense. It's a world founded on peace rather than conflict for a start off. And obviously, he didn't have access to the original writer at all. I'd be really fascinated if he actually had access to video copies of the original, because it did exist at the time. But
I will get into that more with the audio essay, but just to tell you, I saw the Sensorites 3 times already on my various PBS stations before the novelization came out, so I would have been very familiar with it already. What Nigel Robinson does is he updates the technology in the spaceship from 1960s tech to 1980s tech. So all of a sudden you have digital readouts and you have a lot more space that would not have fit in the studio at the time. That's just one example of many fixes that he makes as he goes along.
Yeah, and I really love the way he did that first episode. That first episode, I think, is a genuinely great episode. Doctor, whatever your opinion of the story, because it's so eerie. That that prologue he gives you, it's the body's dead, floating. It's like a cold open. he fixes that opening scene.
And it's brilliant because this is back in the era of the show when the stories begin in the TARDIS, and we don't leave the TARDIS until the regulars do, and they spend most of episode 1 exploring every inch of studio space and narrating what they see. This was just the way Doctor Who was made its first couple of years. So the Daleks begins that way, Planet of Giants begins that way, the Sensorites begins that way, Reign of Terror begins that way.
Yeah.
He goes kind of Terrence Dicks, and he gives us a prologue that is a very vivid and atmospheric prologue showing us the bodies in space before the TARDIS even arrives. And whereas on TV the TARDIS arrives on the bridge because there was only room for the bridge, he has the TARDIS arrive in a back corridor and the characters have to make their way to the bridge first.
Yeah, that space, it seems a lot more spacious almost than the actual one we get on screen. You know, I'm sure Ian Levine would hate it because obviously he wanted it to be exactly as it was on screen in the 60s. But you can't, if you're making or essentially remaking something of the day, you can't go with that. You have to be conscious of the audience. You know, at this point, this book was pretty much the first encounter I had with the Sensorites. Or maybe, I can't remember if Andrew Pixie had archived it by then or how much had been in Doctor magazine, but I wasn't familiar with the story at all. So I had lapped this book up.
And the summer of 1987 is Hartnell Central because we are in the middle of a run of 4 straight Hartnell novelizations. You had Space Museum last week. That does exist. I had seen it. Sensorites I'd already seen 3 times. Reign of Terror, which is next week's book, existed in the archives but was not available commercially until about 15 years later. And then the Romans, which will be the last of the 4 straight Hartnells, it existed. I had seen it, but again, it would not have been seen in the UK since the 1960s. And then later on down the calendar, I see The Massacre, I see The Rescue, and I see Time Meddler by Nigel Robinson himself. And all 3 of those are going to take significant liberties with the TV story. So it's a very imaginative era for Target right now. And yeah, you cannot write for Ian Levine as your sole audience. You can never sell a line of books if you're writing only for one specific quirky reader.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember the target audience at this point. We were here to experience the stories. I know video was kind of just coming in, and certainly I think by this point, there were videos circulating in fandom. Because I know when I first got into fandom, I did end up borrowing tapes, and my friend had all the Hartnells, which was early 90s. But I hadn't seen these. These were still a primary point of watching these stories. And that kind of younger audience, even the one generation above us who'd grown up with Tom, with John, maybe hadn't seen these stories. So these were, to me, is the most thrilling period of the targets.
Let's talk a little bit about the Sensorites as televised, and I'm going to, as I so often do, relate back to the 3 Darren Mooney questions from the 250 podcast.
Yes.
His questions are about the top 250 films of all time as voted on by the Internet Movie Database. I'm going to go with my 60 for 60 theme from last year. I'm going to ask you, does the Sensorites belong on a list of the 60 greatest Doctor Who stories made in its first 60 years on television?
Oh, this is a good one. I probably would, because I adore the Hartnell era generally. Because it's one of those, I go back to it, and there's just this kind of sense of you don't know what the show's going to be. That first series is, we're going to try everything. We're going to throw things at the wall and hope something sticks. And I just think it's fascinating. I know. This is the interesting thing for me. It was always seen as this really slow, really dull story, and it's essentially aimed at children with maybe the Sensorites as quite a simplistic allegory, maybe, but it's got such a charm to it almost. It's got it's got probably Doctor Who's first significant guest star with Peter Glaze, who was quite big from children's TV at the time. So I kind of would put it in the age where you've got extended series on Netflix, on Disney Plus. That pace of storytelling has become much less of a problem, which I never saw coming.
Wow. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the Sensorites after we finish the 3 questions. So we've talked about, does it belong on a list of the 60 greatest? And the second question is the Sensorites on your own personal top 60 list? And that can reference favorites rather than perhaps the objective best. We all have our guilty pleasures, stories that we'd rather watch than some of the all-time greats, which are a little bit drier or darker.
Well, I just did they're doing on Gallifrey Basin their Games of Rassilon section. They're doing a 1-round top 30 tournament, and I didn't put it in my top 30, so it's not in the top 30. But I think I'd have it in consideration for kind of the lower rung of it. Certainly, maybe the 50s or 60s at least.
I'll jump in here. I did my top 60 list last year, and I did not use the preference tracker. I was sitting in a hotel room in Baltimore when I was down there for work for a week, and I had a lot of free time. So I went through the entire episode guide, Unearthly Child, all the way through Power of the Doctor. At that point was the most recent televised story. If I liked the story a lot, I put it on my list. And if I was indifferent to the story or hated it, obviously it didn't go on the list. I ended up with 99 titles. And then I just winnowed them down, went to the list several times. Some stories had to stand in for others. I'm not going to have every single Hartnell historical on there. So
I was tempted when I made my list, I have to admit.
A story like Marco Polo has to step aside, and other historicals are going to have to stand in for it. I couldn't have every single Dalek story on there, so some Dalek stories are standing in for others. So my top 60 is more representative than absolute. The Sensorites was on my list of 99. In the end, there were 4 Hartnell stories in my top 99 that didn't make the top 60. The Aztecs, again, great story, but there are better historicals later on, also by John Lucarotti. So the Aztecs I had to put aside. The Chase, which for me is just an absolute delight. And yes, there's some production problems, but it's a delightful story. It's very funny. It's got Hartnell making fun of the fact that wait, scratch that. That's the wrong train of thought. There was a Hartnell, so there was a Terry Nation story where the Doctor comments on the lack of a color television in the TARDIS because it's a black and white show. That may have been Keys of Marinus. But
yes, I think
the Chase is very meta because the TARDIS crew is watching the Daleks on television and being scared by them.
Yes.
It's the same Terry Nation kind of meta joke. But I ended up putting it off my list because there are other Dalek stories like Dalek's Master Plan, which wanted to be in the top 60 instead. And then the War Machines. The War Machines is dry, but it's so visually inventive, and it's such a great leap forward for the series that while it's not on the same league as, a Spearhead from Space or The Invasion, the War Machines definitely deserves a spot in my top 99.
Oh, it involves the whole genre, doesn't it, of Doctor Who? That modern invasion.
So Sensorites, Aztecs, Chase, War Machines are in my top 99, bubbling under, not on the top 60. So the Sensorites is not actually on my top 60 list. I think the Sensorites belongs, and I'll tell you why. This is the story where you have philosophical aliens who are scared of the dark. That makes them a more realistic adversary than the Daleks, who are a little bit cartoonish. The Sensorites are individualized. Each Sensorite has their own personality. You have the first elder, the second elder, the city administrator. They are all very different. They are working to very different ends. One of them has this tragic death, and nobody ever finds out that he wasn't a traitor, so we're not even sure if his good name is cleared at the end. The Sensorites are a very sophisticated and complex alien culture, and people overlook that because of the costumes and some of the hammy acting. But I think this is a story that is trying really hard to tell an original science fiction epic. And then, of course, in the end, the bad guy is not even the city administrator, but rather humans from planet Earth who've been behind the disasters all along, thereby validating the city administrator's theories, even if his methods, of course, were that's beyond reproach.
That's the lovely thing. The city administrator is the villain, but he's right as well. It's got a moral complexity that the story is often, not seen to have.
There are flubs, and I'm going to try and do a supercut later in the episode for my audio essay, though I haven't sat down to actually do it yet. I would say that the audio flubs in this story, and it's not just William Hartnell, the audio flubs in this story make the dialogue better than it would have been if the actors had just read the words as they were supposed to be printed. So I call it found poetry. So the line in the book when the Doctor discovers the watch that Kaplan Maitland is wearing.
Oh, yes.
He says, this model is one of the old automatic types. It depends on the movement of the wrist to recharge the spring inside every 24 hours. That is a totally forgettable line of dialogue that has no relevance to the rest of the story. It's only a minor clue at the very beginning and then it's forgotten about. Because William Hartnell says these are of the non-winding time, you will never forget that line ever.
It's weird. I don't know how many of these. A lot of them are those because of the way the show was recorded. You know, it was recorded as live on a Friday night, I think it was, and they only had a certain amount of time to do it in, and you know, you had the film, so of course you didn't have time for retakes. So I believe, as Caroline Ford repeatedly says, the only way to stop the whole recording was to swear. But most of the time, they just keep going. They cut through it all.
And there's a couple of other ones not by Hartnell. The first Sensorite, after the Doctor finds the source of the poison, he's supposed to say, give the Doctor my congratulations, which, you know, great, fine. You're going to forget that line of dialogue 30 seconds after it's uttered. But the actor says, give my Doctor the congratulations, which is hilarious. And along the same lines, you have the city administrator's stooge who gets arrested.
Oh, the engineer.
The engineer, and he doesn't. He's supposed to say, "I overheard them talking." Again, functional dialogue. When he says, "I heard them over talking," that has become.
That's a whole different thing, isn't it?
That has become. I will say over talking now because I'm getting that. Anytime I say over talking, it is the Sensorites in my head coming out. The line works better because of the fluff. I'm not making fun of the artists. Again, fluffs are endemic in 1960s live to tape TV. I think these particular lines as they come out are just charming, and they never don't make me smile. And it's an added plus watching the story for me.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of it. If the story was flawless, it would be duller. And I think that's true for almost all of Doctor Who. It's the flaws which let you almost love the stories at times. Doctor Who's notorious for that, the quality of special effects. But again, I love Doctor Who because of course it's less interesting when it's perfect. When everyone's achieves exactly what they want to do. This Doctor Who is just not meant to be perfect to me. It's meant to be this kind of almost very, very human show. It's more human than, say, Star Trek, which is almost a sterile future, particularly as conceived by Gene Roddenberry. But Doctor Who, it's this human interaction, even in the making of and in the way the future is constructed.
And that's why it took me a very long time to warm up to Star Trek The Next Generation, because it is very, very sterile. You hear the constant whine of the ship's engines. So even when there's long, silent passages, it's the constant whine of the ship's engine in the background. I've come to appreciate Next Generation as a very good show, but again, it's very sterile at times, and it's not always enjoyable to watch. It doesn't have the edge that the original series has for me. And by the same token, the Sensorites certainly has its problems with pacing. I think it takes two characters 7 minutes to walk across the studio in episode 2.
Yes.
They just couldn't quite get the pacing right to match the 25 minutes of runtime, which is another thing that happens when you're working by the seat of your pants that way. So the Sensorites doesn't work if you watch it as one 2.5 hour movie. It was the PBS station in Pennsylvania, Channel 44, decided to run the Sensorites as a special on a Saturday afternoon, all 6 episodes in a row as a marathon during the pledge drive season, to try and get fans to give money, because we're going to show you more Doctor Who if you give us more money. And the phones just didn't ring. I was out of the house, so I taped the entire thing, 6 episodes and pledge breaks. And I was watching the pledge breaks, and The woman is going like around episode 3 or 4. Doctor Who fans, where are you? You know, the phones aren't ringing. Possibly because even in 1986, young kids are not running home to watch archival black and white footage where it takes 7 minutes to walk down a hallway. And I felt bad for that station, and they eventually stopped showing Doctor Who by the late 80s, although they also had the Star Trek license. So I'd watch 2 episodes of the original series every Saturday night in the early 90s, which may be very unpopular. But that's how I got my Star Trek fix. So the Sensorites maybe were the only people that it works for, but I think if you look at the dialogue, the types of characters the Sensorites are, the complexity of the plot, and if you set aside concerns over pacing and concerns over production values, I think the Sensorites is great.
I agree, yeah, and I think the thing that fascinates me is I think that I don't know if this is a crude thing, but I think they are trying to make an analog with maybe South Asian culture, because I think, you know, they're afraid of loud noises. They're very civilized, very peaceful. So I think to a certain degree, I know Peter R. Newman was out there fighting at one point. I can't remember if it was Burma or Japan. So it's certainly influenced by I can't remember the name of the Japanese soldier who didn't know that the Second World War had ended. But that's, I think, the idea behind the humans who are planting the poison in the Sensorites' water supply.
Have you seen the movie Yesterday's Enemy?
I have not, I must admit.
I learned about it when the Sensorites came out on DVD, and
Yes.
Toby Haydock did the documentary on Peter R. Newman.
Still one
And
of
the
the best things
document-
they've ever
Sorry?
done, isn't it? Still one of the best things they've ever done for the DVD range.
Right, now, obviously, they had all this information in front of them when they wrote the script, but they phrase it as a quest. So Toby Haydock was going on an adventure trying to get this information, and it's much more entertaining than just watching in 10-minute, this is who he was, and this happened, and that happened. So that was the first time that I'd heard of Yesterday's Enemy. I immediately went to the darker corners of the internet, and I found it. It's got Leo McKern. It's got Gordon Jackson from The Great Escape. It's got a great cast. So it's based on a TV play by Peter R. Newman. Then it was a stage play, but it's also a Hammer movie in the late 50s. And it does have broad echoes of the Sensorites. So it takes place in Burma. So you're right. It must have been Burma where he fought.
Yep.
And it's British soldiers who come across a village, and they come across literally yesterday's enemy. And there's sort of a big tragic ending that I'm not going to spoil. But you can definitely see elements of the Sensorites in that. So the Sensorites isn't just science fiction. It's also literally a World War II movie.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Though the way that the British, I think, and American troops were going to really genuinely foreign and alien environments. You know, it's underestimated how much of an influence that wartime was on Doctor Who, because, you know, Terry Nations, that's the guy who was too young to go fighting, and he's asking questions about himself there. Those, you know, how many of those early Doctor Who pioneers had that wartime experience? And I think if you add that layer to the Sensorites, it makes it a lot more of an interesting story. It recharges that kind of what Peter R. Newman is trying to do, what he's trying to say about that society and how they work.
And that makes the Sensorites, like the Daleks, a World War II movie with a science fiction spin on it.
Yeah.
The Daleks obviously is the show that put Doctor Who on the map, and the Sensorites is the show that almost Doctor Who took off the map. But I think in some ways the Sensorites is better than the Daleks, not because it's as memorable, and obviously, apart from the Ood, it did not spawn a long-running string of Dalek sequels. But I think it's probably a more intelligent script. Looking at the cast list for Yesterday's Enemy, by the way, you have... I can't quite... Oh, it's the First Elder.
Yeah. One of the figures.
Oh, wow. That's right. I was on the Trap 1 episode where we covered that box set, but I don't have the toys myself.
Oh, they're gorgeous. It's one of those things I went, I have to have those.
It's one of those toys that it's harder to have in America because everybody knows what a Dalek is, but most Americans are going to have no idea what a Sensorite is, and they're not going to know what I'm holding up.
No, I mean, the only place you'd probably pick them up is conventions, I'd imagine. And they would be going for a pretty penny.
Going back to the cast list for yesterday's enemy, we also have Wolf Morris. Obviously, he's going to be in Abominable Snowman.
Snowman, yeah.
We have Burt Quauk, who is later going to be in Fort of Doomsday. And then we have Timothy Bateson, who, of course, became famous as Binro the Heretic in Rebos Operation.
Oh, I just watched that last night.
Isn't that a great story?
Oh, it's a wonderful performance. Just so rich. Just a dialogue. And that scene with Binro the Heretic, it's Doctor Who in a nutshell, isn't it? That sense of wonder, that kind of reassurance. Yes, you are right to have this sense of wonder.
And the Rebos Operation, by the way, is number 39 on my top 60. So that actually outranks the Sensorites.
Oh, when I was doing that, it was one of those kind of stories that's just on the borderline. I couldn't quite fit in. So it is in my top 60, but not in the top 30.
Same here. I could have had it a little bit higher, but there's so much good stuff in the top 38. I have it just below Extremis and just above the Time Meddler. So right in between the 12th Doctor and the 1st Doctor.
That's a nice sandwich.
I like juxtapositions like that. So we've talked about the Sensorites, Peter R. Newman, the Peter R. Newman documentary. You've showed me your Sensorites toy, which I desperately wish that I had, even though I don't know where I would put it. We've talked about you, of course. We've talked about Conundrum. We've talked about Christmas on a Rational Planet. The other books you're covering for Ian Martin, you mentioned Frontier Worlds. That's Peter Angelides, right?
That is, yes.
I remember enjoying that very much when I first read it, and I haven't read it again, but I recall, is that the one where Fitz goes undercover and calls himself Frank Sinatra?
That's exactly the one. Yes.
I love that, yeah.
And he gives Compassion Nancy as the name as well.
Oh, that's right. And what was the fourth book you said you covered?
Eternity Weeps.
Oh, yes. That was the Jim Mortimer book that closed out the New Adventures with a very high body count and controversially kills off a beloved old companion in a horrible way.
Oh, it's graphic. It's one of those things that go, okay, I need a good reason for this companion to kill off. And no, there is absolutely no good reason except for shock value.
And, of course, the fact that same companion is in a romantic relationship with an alien species.
Oh, it's with a Silurian,
That's right.
I believe so, yeah. I thought that bit is fantastic. It's just a little detail never remarked upon. So you're always prefiguring what Stephen Moffat does later in the series.
It's one of those Jim Mortimer books where the setup is immaculate and the storytelling is gripping, and then it just completely, my recollection is it completely falls apart in the last 50 pages.
It's a Jim Mortimer book, so yes. he does have a problem. He sets up everything that's just set up so big, so straight, and the logical conclusion of where he's going, you break Doctor Who at times, and he does break Doctor Who fairly badly, I think, in that point. The whole that future world of Doctor Who. Hang on, you've just destroyed the entire planet essentially. How did you get out of that one? After
what Chris Chibnall did in The Flux, that probably has become the norm for Doctor Who storytelling. Destroy 80% of the universe while you're at it.
Well, they did it in Legopolis as well, I suppose. So.
Oh, no Legopolis at least had the advantage of being accidentally followed up by Castrovalva, where the universe is recreated.
Yes.
Even though that wasn't the original intention.
Oh, God. And, what's it? The Big Bang as well. That's a recreation of the universe story as well. You've standard excuse to any Doctor Who, it's the Time War. You can say, how does reality change? The Time War. It's a nice and easy kind of writer's shorthand, which Russell T Davies is so good at.
And what's been going on over on Strangers in Space? I was going to say that podcast name is the perfect match for this episode, because episode 1 of the Sensorites, of course, is Strangers in Space.
Absolutely. We've just done what I think the JL's recorded this week. He recorded the listeners poll for season 1. So we've done we've done an episode for every one of season 1. We've had Joe Ford from Hampster has just kind of joined us doing Desert Planet picks. So it's got a chap very well, Simon Hart, has done a really wonderful one a couple of weeks ago. Paul Mars has done one. Gary Russell's done one. I did one for my sins. But and the idea is it's a certain amount of things you would take to a desert planet. So, a food, a drink, photo, a person who's not a family member, an old Doctor, a 20th century Doctor Who episode, a 21st century Doctor Who episode. So you get to pick your stuff and you have a conversation about it, and they are wonderful episodes. Joe is such a good guy for chatting to, and I have done a couple of episodes with Joe actually quite recently as well, where I try and do a redemption on Legend of the Sea Devils, which is a brave choice, I admit.
The best parts of Legend of the Sea Devils didn't quite make it to camera. Again, great setup and it's a terrible finish. I would love to know what got deleted for the TV edit.
Oh,
I will defend Legend of the Sea Devils, but it doesn't have a chance of being in my top 60 because the ending is just in some ways unforgivable.
No, but the one thing I have about it is my nephew. It was the story that made him fall in love with the show, because before that, he'd seen it as kind of this kind of scary show that my son Eddie watched, and he wasn't too keen on it. But he said he watched that, and bang, he's a fan. He's buying the books. He's secondhand shopping for Targets. It's wonderful to see him go from 0 to almost 100 in a couple of years. We took him to a mini convention with David Howe and Sam Stone. Went and saw Daphne Ashbrook and had a conversation with her about a TV movie. So it was really kind of lovely to see how they're engaged. And actually, one of the books they did buy was that second Doctor Who quiz book. And I was asking them questions out of it. So it's tables turned later, I'm sure.
Huh. I almost got to meet Cy Hart when I was in London this past weekend. I was supposed to meet up with him and Conrad, but he had to be a late scratch, I think, because of work. So it ended up just being me and Conrad. But Cy has probably been a guest on this show more than almost anybody else, with the possible exception of Jim Sangster, who contributes segments to episodes that he's not in. But I'll be back.
Lovely guys.
I'll be back in August. Hopefully, we'll get to finally meet Cy face to face.
Lovely. Are you at Gallifrey next year?
Almost certainly, yes.
Marv, I shall meet you there, if not before.
Oh, great. We shall have to do a live episode then.
Oh, I'm very happy to. I think I'm due to do another one around then, aren't I? Something around then.
We are coming back for a Sylvester McCoy book, which is going to be probably in about 6 months. Galley is in 7 months. So if you factor in bonus episodes, I know I recorded 3 Doctor Who Lits at Galley this past February. I'm sure I can record a lot more at the next one.
Sounds good to me. If I'm coherent, because otherwise the jet lag might hit me at some point. So,
in fact, for the McCoy books, I'm going to try and have 2 guests instead of 1. And the co-guest that I have slotted for your next episode is also going to be at Galley. So maybe we can do a 3-person round table.
I'm in. Definitely.
Perfect. So let's segue neatly into the second Doctor Who quiz book. And I know Smudge is blocking my screen, but you should be able to see it.
I can.
Last week, when I had on a guest for the Space Museum, David Barsky, we did The Adventures of the First Doctor, Section 1 on page 12. We're going to stick with the same questions, but I want to ask you 6 through 10 rather than 1 through 5.
Okay.
And again, it is 5 questions. 3 out of 5 is a winning answer. 5 out of 5 will win you the People's Ovation and fame forever. Question 6. Where exactly did the TARDIS carrying the Doctor and Dodo land in 1966?
Oh, it was on the edge of a square. What was the square? I can't remember the name of the square now. Obviously London, quite close to the post office tower, and I've been there. I know the place in real life. I can't remember it.
The name of the square is also better known, perhaps, as the name of a tavern where writers of the New Adventures.
It's Fitzroy Square, then. It's Fitzroy Square. Of course, it's Fitzroy Square.
When we were walking from Tottenham Court Tube Station to our hotel, I saw the post office tower in the distance. We did not have a chance to walk up to it.
Oh, you weren't too far from the Fitzroy Tavern then.
Yeah, did not go
Yeah.
there either. Question 7. So you're 1 for 1 with a little bit of an assist. Question
Assist.
7. Who was Diomede?
It was Dyoni.
Diomede. Diomede.
Diomede. It's Diomede is. Oh, is it in the myth? Is she in the Mythmakers? I can't remember. My brain's gone.
Specifically, who in the Mythmakers?
Let's see, because Vicky's obviously Cressida. Is she one of? Is it one of the other handmaidens of Cassandra?
Not a Trojan. Not a Trojan. Not somebody who was on the Trojan
on the
side.
other side. Yeah.
All right, I'll give you the answer then, and this is per Nigel Robinson, a slain Greek soldier and friend of Odysseus, whose identity Stephen assumed in Troy.
Oh, of course. I really need to rewatch the Mythmakers, which was on my top 30.
I don't think the Mythmakers ended up in my top 60. I am inordinately fond of it, but again, there are so many good historicals, and in fact, so many good comedy historicals that, again, some stories had to stand in for others. The Mythmakers is not in my top 60.
Fundamentally, the Mythmakers and the Gunfighters are doing exactly the same thing. So I think you can go with one or the other there.
And speaking of the Gunfighters, that is number 13 on my top 60.
Nice. Good choice.
Big fan of the Gunfighters. So you're 1 for 2. Question 8. And this is a very thematic question. Ian fell victim to the plague, quote unquote, which had swept the Sensorites planet. Why were the other members of the TARDIS crew unaffected?
Because they drank the crystal water rather than the ordinary water.
That's right. The answer, as per Nigel Robinson, Ian was the only member of the crew who had drunk water taken from one of the aqueducts, which had been poisoned by the company of insane Earthmen hiding in the caves on the Sense Sphere. Nigel Robinson writes that sentence in 1983, perhaps unaware that he was going to become the novelizer of Sensorites 4 years later.
Absolutely.
Question 9. How were the Menoptera armed?
Oh, let's see, they were. It's not the Venom Grips, because the Venom Grips are the Zabi. Oh God, what is it? I really need to rewatch the Web Planet. What's the thing they have?
I would not have gotten this right. I'm looking at the answer and I have no recollection of the answer.
Go on. I'll take a pass on it.
Electron guns.
Nope. They've got guns, I'm sure, but
my mind no longer retains information like that. So you're 2 out of 4.
I've hit 50 fairly recently, so yes, you know that. Hang on.
Same here. I hit 50 last year, and it's all downhill from there mentally.
10 years ago, you go bang. Now it's
So we're at the last question. You've got 2 right. You've got 2 wrong. If you get this right, you are a winner. Question 10. Which member of the TARDIS crew was found guilty of the murder of Ypres in the city of Millennius, and who had actually done the deed?
That was Ian, and it was Fiona Shaw character who it's Ypres' wife, and her accomplice. So Ian did it, and what's his?
I'll accept the names of the actors if you can't remember the names of the characters, and I'll just give you a hint.
Fiona Walker,
right.
Isn't it? That's it.
And like Fiona Walker, the other actor also came back for a Sylvester McCoy story.
Right now. Yeah, right. So not Leslie French, right? Oh my God, trying to brain. So it's no one in something with Battlefield. No one. I was running through them all now. Too early for Michael Sheard again. Oh, what's his name?
I'll just give you one final hint. The actor who played the other bad guy in Keys of Marinus later comes back in Time and the Ronnie.
Oh, Donald Pickering.
Yes.
That's it. See, I knew that.
So with a heavy assist, you've made it to 3 out of 5, and you are a winner.
It's a community thing. It's a fandom's community thing. I take no glory. I pass it back to you.
So what else can we say about the Sensorites? I'll be covering the book in a little more detail in the audio essay, although a lot of the points that I wanted to make in the audio essay I've already discussed with you, so I may have to cut some of those out. Nigel Robinson will unsentimentally change bits of the TV story if he thinks they're not going to work in print. So I know when I interviewed him for Vorp last year about Unearthly Child, I did ask him off the record about the end of Underwater Menace, because he completely rewrites the ending.
He does.
And his point to me is that the ending is dramatically unsatisfying. It is just Professor Zaroff locked out of a room trying to reach through the bars, and he turns it into a fight with a character who was not seen on TV in that particular week, episode 4. So what sort of changes does he make to the Sensorites to perhaps make the book read a little better than the TV story watches?
It's that opening for a start. It's a reflect kind of that opening where he has them being reflective rather than having that dialogue talking about these things we've all done. And the other thing he does is he really knits it well into Doctor Who's package. It has Ian think back to Marinus, that kind of thing. It has these adventures about the Daleks, and he doesn't really it's kind of, the Sensorites is so very different from what's around it that he kind of makes it feel more like Doctor Who. I would say it's more of Doctor Who feels it, and he does this in a very novelistic way. It's all, he gets in the heads of the characters and he lets the characters tell the story rather than relying on 60s TV, which had that kind of standard viewpoint that the camera barely moved. So he lets you into that story, I would say, as a book. You can empathize with the characters. You can see their points of view, which again, the Sensorites is very much about, I would say.
So as a bonus round, we know the Sensorites don't come back for 21st Century Who, but we know that RTD likes to bring back obscure villains and not the obvious ones. So beyond bringing back Sutek, this is also the guy who brought back the Macra.
Yes.
The Ood are possibly the most memorable villain created entirely for the new series, because the Slovene came first, but we don't really see them again on TV after the first season outside of the Sarah Jane Adventures. But the Ood do tend to come back several times. I vividly recall when I watched the Doctor Who Confidential for The Impossible Planet, Russell specifically mentions that they are meant to be the cousins of the Sensorites, and he even shows a clip of the Sensorites in that episode of Confidential, which I have not seen in 18 years, but I can remember it as clear as day. And then for Planet of the Ood, a year or two later, they name the Ood planet the Ood Sphere, meaning that it is the sister planet or in the same solar system as the Sense Sphere.
Yeah.
Do you think the Ood work as well as the Sensorites? What do you think that Russell has done with the Ood that builds on the success, such as it is, of the Sensorites as an alien race?
The Ood are, I'm going to have to be very careful in case my son hears this, because the Ood are his actual favourite Doctor Who monsters. Oh, wow. Which is, I know, it's a very, he actually told Stephen Moffat that when he asked him, when he met him at Galley. I said, "What, wrong, it's the Daleks." No. So yeah, that's a small no. I think a lot of it is that kind of design. There's the shape of the head, isn't it? Is the big thing. They're also that they're telepathic, so they are peaceful. They kind of really marry up thematically. The pair of them are peaceful speech. So you can imagine they're from a similar area of the galaxy, have a similar culture. Maybe they haven't. They're aliens that maybe haven't left their world too far. So I think it's a thematic building on it. It's what the Ood are, maybe what the Sensorites are trying to avoid becoming, because they don't want, the molybdenum revealed by to the human race. But this, the Ood are that exploited species. So perhaps there's a logical outcome of what the Ood would have been in another kind of universe.
That's a really good point. And there's elements to the presentation of the Ood that you just could not have done in studio in 1964. You can't have the electronically treated voice. You can't have 50 Ood speaking in unison. You can't have the brain in their hand or the glowing sphere being carried around at all times. So the Ood are obviously a distinct species with their own characteristics, and they're not as individualized as the Sensorites, but the Ood, I think, aren't invented unless Russell has seen the Sensorites first. And they are an effort to present the Sensorites in a way that they would have been presented if the Sensorites was written in 2006 rather than 1964. So as far as I'm concerned, they are a cousin, if not sister species. And as far as I'm concerned, any Ood story is a spiritual sequel to the Sensorites. And I'm glad the Sensorites has that legacy lasting into the 21st century.
I'd say that Sensorite toy, it's nearly 60 years on. The Sensorite has maybe the whole merchandise is that Target novelization and the DVDs, but 6 years on, it's remembered by enough people that there is a market who will snap up toys of the Sensorites. Action figures. It's wonderful. That's what Doctor Who does. We don't forget.
The city administrator has come a long way.
Absolutely. He won in the end, obviously.
And lastly, I know that you and Jeff have your football podcast. Jeff, my American friend, who I've known since Records Doctor Who in the 1990s, he will be on the show, too, coming up in the coming months.
Oh, wonderful. I did chat to him about it. And he's very much looking forward to that. And of course, he's writing for 2000 AD now as well, which is wonderful to see.
Yes. Now, he and I were part of the same fanfic writing circle in the late 90s. So there was this group of fans who got together on All Doctor Who Creative to write the Internet Adventures. And the stories are done as round robin. So you have 12 writers. Each writer gets a chapter. First writer writes a chapter. Second writer builds on that, takes the story in whatever direction he wants. And there's no coordination in advance. So you never know where the story is going to wind up compared to where it finished. So Jeff and I wrote back-to-back chapters, I think, for 2 different stories. And we're sitting there on IRC after the chapters are out talking about what we changed and why. Not intentionally messing with each other, but we definitely both carried each other's stories in ways that were not intended by the first writer to get there.
That's the wonderful thing about those round robins. It's merging your voices almost. It's seeing where you kind of get on with someone, where you kind of go, I wouldn't have done it like that, and changing it. It's a really fun exercise as a writer.
There was one story where I forget. I think it was an original Doctor and companion team, not any of the TV Doctors. They were orbiting a black hole and they were on a space station. So a very classic Who setup. And my intention when I wrote my chapter in the middle was that it was going to be evil Logopolis on the other side of the black hole.
Oh, nice.
And I put a clue in the text that if you were thinking about Logopolis, you could not fail to miss the clue. Well, clearly Jeff wasn't thinking about Logopolis. He took the story in a whole other direction, but it worked much better than it would have been if he had just copied my idea.
Oh God, yeah. It's that building on stuff is the favorite thing. It's what it gives you license to play with other people's ideas, and you don't necessarily get that very often. And that really works me. Does that story still exist? I'd love to have a look at it at some point.
There was an Internet Adventures archive for the longest time, and it had a lot of those stories archived. Not all of them, but some of them. I just don't know if that archive is still maintained, because it would have been on somebody's private website, and I don't know if that website is still in operation. I would Google it now, but I have Smudge literally sitting on my keyboard, and if I type it, I'm going to get bit. So if I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes.
Cats are always in charge, let's face it.
And if Jeff is able to find those stories when I have him on in a few months, I will have him and I perhaps do dramatic readings from each other's chapters.
Oh, fantastic.
I have not committed fanfic in about 25 years, and now that I'm talking about it, I'm getting very nostalgic. And not that I would ever do it again, but I miss those days when I would have the time to think about writing original bad Doctor Who stories.
Oh yeah, I that was something I loved. I think for 10 years, writing for kind of these anthologies where we you would get into sort of like Sam is that Doctor Who.
Oh right, that's a great word, Sam is that, right?
But yeah, still think my favorite one was Seasons of War was the one I did in particular, because the editor for that volume really pushed you to kind of think about Doctor Who and what you could do with it.
Was that one of the Big Finish anthologies?
No, there were a few Big Finish writing in there. I know Matt Fitton did an early story for it. Gary Russell was in it. Paul Mars did something for it. It was kind of in the period where after Day of the Doctor, where they didn't have, there wasn't anything else with the War Doctor apart from maybe the novel. So it was kind of it meant to not tell the War Doctor's full story, but tell a kind of story of his life across so many, from when he's just regenerated through to almost, just before Day of the Doctor. And it was kind of one of those because he wanted Doctor Who as kind of a war thing. So he wanted to be a little grim. And I kind of naturally resist grim stories, but he always wanted these kind of, it's like the best actors. They want to take a particular angle on it, and they make you think about that. So my kind of story for it was it's called Always Face the Curtain with a Bow, and people have been very kindly comparing it to a story that came afterwards. It was the Doctor. Essentially, my idea was that war, involves a lot of torture, that's how people get information and try and win the war and get with inside info. So my idea was I trapped the Doctor in this essentially a big country house where he keeps getting killed and then being brought back to life the next day. And I just went, I want it to be but I wanted it to be funny. So it's very kind of black humor. I had the Doctor killed by falling pianos or mind-eating penguins and such like.
And I found a link to the Internet Adventures, and I found the specific story where Jeff and I had back-to-back chapters in the Black Hole story, but it only has the name of the story and the 12 authors of the 12 chapters. It does not have the text of the book anymore. But I see Cameron Dixon, who later ran the Canadian fanzine Enlightenment, and I also see John Seavey, who's written some books for ATB Publishing. So some of those names now jump out on me on the page all these years later.
Oh, they're familiar names from back in the day, when I first came online.
And I see the Internet Adventures continued a long time after I drifted away from that corner of the internet. But that is wild. I'm sure the text is out there somewhere, maybe on the Google Groups archive.
Yes, I remember Jake Pagoda when I think there was a cyber attack on the archive, and a lot of that was lost, which I'm not sure how much value was lost. I remember a lot of conversations on there. Steve Kitson with John Bloom going back and forth. My wonderful co-collaborator on Shooty Dog Thing, Paul Castle, who I saw a couple of weeks ago. He was very active on there too for a few months. That was wonderful. And again, that's where I really got to know Jeff. So yeah, there are good things to come out of Doctor Who mailing lists. Plenty of them.
That's true. They were definitely Wild West, completely crazy. But the friendships that lasted, like John Blum and I, even though we fought so many times on Rec Arts, we're still friends 30 years later. And he'll be on the show again in the next couple of months.
Oh, John's wonderful company again. I see him when he's at Galley, I think, generally. But I saw him when he came over, I think, when he was doing his Prisoner book. He did Prisoner book with my good friend Rupert, which I've got a cameo in. I think Rupert wrote me into it, which is wonderful.
Oh, wow. I, of course, had my little larger than a cameo in Vampire Science. That was my claim to fame in the fictional works of John Blum.
Oh,
but
yes.
we're just about at the end of the hour. Jon, thanks so much for joining me again today. This has been a blast.
Oh, total pleasure. Always fun.
And it's good to know you'll be at Galley. So I will coordinate so we can record your next episode live somewhere at Galley.
Magic. I'll have to show you because I know Galley. I'm usually running around with people, but we will sort something out definitely.
Yeah, I usually tend to be very busy at Galley as well, but since the convention is only 8 hours during the day and there's plenty of after hours, I'm sure we can find a spare quiet corner for an hour to talk about your next book.
Certainly will.
When was the last time you were there?
Last time was just 2020.
Oh wow, I would have been there. No, 2020 was right before the pandemic.
It was literally a month. I think I remember flying over and you saw people with masks on there, and you're like, hang on a second, this story you're hearing might be. And I remember Galley was warning us before we went as well. It was confined to an area which is way away from LA. I can't remember exactly where.
I was at that Galley, but I think that was before I knew you through Twitter, because that was before I did my Twitter pilgrimage, which is how you and I eventually met. So I'll definitely see you there in 2025.
Magic. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks again and have a great night.
And you take care.
Doctor Who, The Sensorites by Nigel Robinson. Televised as The Sensorites, teleplay by Peter R. Newman. Televised June through August 1964. Paperback release date July 16, 1987. Target book number 118. Cover artist Nick Spender. The TARDIS materializes on board a dark and silent spaceship. As the Doctor, Susan, Ian, and Barbara penetrate the craft's eerie gloom, they come across what appears to be the bodies of two dead astronauts. But the astronauts are far from dead, and are living in mortal fear of the Sensorites, a race of telepathic creatures from the Sense Sphere. When the lock of the TARDIS is stolen, the Doctor is forced into an uneasy alliance with the aliens. And when he arrives on the Sensorites' planet, he discovers that it is not only the humans who have cause to be afraid. The summer of 1987 is when I started to fall out of love with Doctor Who, after 2.5 years of obsession. The answer is the same for many young teenagers, 13 going on 14, love. The sort of heart-crushing desire to be with somebody else that overrides childhood things. Girls, in my case, 2 in particular, one real, who I'd meet in August, but before that, in June '87, a teen actress in an old, late 70s American martial arts movie that would air every few months on the Lifetime cable network. Guess the movie, and I'll give you co-producer credit for the next 6 episodes. But once I discovered girls, my 2 principal hobbies, Doctor Who books and baseball card collecting, took a serious hit. Now, there's a lot to recommend about the Sensorites, even if I was in the worst possible headspace in July 1987 to recognize it. It is Nigel Robinson's first novelization. He was range editor at the time. Something interesting about Nigel's novelizations reminds me of the stories about Jack Kirby when he first jumped ship from Marvel to work for DC and reportedly asked to be put on DC's lowest selling book that didn't have an assigned writer, so he wasn't putting anybody out of work. That turned out to be Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. And while Kirby's style wasn't a great fit for DC at the time, they had somebody else draw Superman's face for Kirby, a mind-boggling editorial decision. It did give Kirby an opportunity to kick off his New Gods cycle. Now, I'm not saying that Nigel Robinson is going to create the Target novelizations version of the New Gods, but he does take on the role of writing the novelizations of TV stories that are decidedly less popular than others. And he's also going to start taking liberties with the TV text, not in this book, but soon we'll see him changing plot details and endings, both in books that he writes and in other novelizations that come out under his editorship. So, with an eye on what about the book version of the Sensorites is different from TV, we'll start where Target always starts, at the beginning, on page 7. The first thing Robinson adds is context. Now, you might not find this especially revolutionary, but here's a book coming out in paperback exactly 23 years after its parent story aired on TV, wildly out of story order. The Sensorites had already been on TV 3 times in my region by July 1987, originally airing on New Jersey Network, PBS, in late 1985, another airing on Channel 44 out of Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania in 1986, and then Channel 21, my Long Island PBS station, in early 87. But for most book purchasers in the UK, the Sensorites would not even have been a memory. Robinson thus uses Chapter 1 to describe the TARDIS and each of the 4 regulars, and what they were doing exactly before this story began. The Aztecs, episode 88 of this podcast, so nearly 30 books ago. He eliminates much of the time-filling TV dialogue, in which the Doctor recaps every past Season 1 adventure, and a missing adventure involving Henry VIII and the Tower of London, but he keeps in, as prose, one of those magic Hartnell lines.
Yes, it all started out as a mild curiosity in the junkyard, and now it's turned out to be quite a great spirited adventure, don't you think?
Robinson adds a 2-page prologue, the prose equivalent of a slow pan through Captain Maitland's spaceship. Then we see the spooky sights of Maitland's and Carol's bodies in suspended animation before the TARDIS does. This is something Terence will also do, adding a prologue to sell you on the mystery of the story before joining the TV action proper at Chapter 1. Robinson adds dimensions to the spaceship, greater length, more corridors, so the TARDIS doesn't just land in a corner of the flight deck like on TV. And it also gives more 1987 vintage technology that 1964, such as computer screens, wouldn't have had. If Robinson tends to overwrite his prose a little bit, and by that, here's the first paragraph of the prologue, page 7. Out in the still and infinite blackness of uncharted space, hundreds of light years from its planet of origin, the spacecraft hung, caught like a fly in a gigantic spider's web. Here in the outermost reaches of the galaxy, few stars shone. What little illumination there was came from the bright yellow world, around which the ship moved in perpetual orbit, and that planet's mother star. Now, this may be a bit much, but Nigel is still a far better wordsmith than some other old TV writers coming back 20-odd years later to novelize their own TV stories. In Chapter 2, Robinson adds more technical detail. Instead of reading a book and calling it bliss, as she does on TV, Susan instead finds the spaceship's flight logs and mentions past destinations and departed crew members. Everything else plays out the same as on TV, with the first of 6 episode endings falling neatly at the end of 2nd out of 12 chapters, except Robinson deletes the found poetry, which I enjoy so much about the TV story. In Chapter 1, William Hartnell's Doctor no longer says that these watches are of the non-winding time, and in Chapter 2, he no longer fancies that he's settled that little bit of solution. Chapter 3 deletes a TV conversation between Carol on the one hand and Barbara and Susan on the other about the time traveler's origin. This highlights the difference between a book and a weekly TV serial. Back in its serial days and before the advent of previouslys, shows had to routinely work in mission statement scenes into every episode as an exposition guide for potential new viewers. This does lead to repetitive material, and is a reason why it is best not to watch these classic serials all in one sitting as a single movie, and hence my least favorite bit of criticism, that any given classic series serial is, quote, 2 episodes too long. This kind of exposition is needed for episode 2 of the Sensorites because in 1964 it was not, quote, episode 2 of the Sensorites, but rather episode 32 of the ongoing series of Doctor Who. So this is one notable deleted scene that Robinson omits for the book, needed for TV, not needed for book 118 of an ongoing novel series.
You're very strange people.
Are we?
Well, you come from nowhere and you seem to be going nowhere.
Oh, we're very dependent on the Doctor. He leads and we follow.
Travel without a purpose.
Oh, no, there's a purpose in it. He's trying to get us back to our own time, on Earth.
Oh, I see. Isn't it a better thing to travel hopefully than arrive?
The episode 2 material in the book also gives Ian a new line of dialogue, the aggressive macho quote, "How the hell did they get in?" The very long business of Ian and Barbara slowly walking down a corridor on TV in the book is turned into a Sensorite-driven fear fest. Page 43, quote, The most basic fear of all is the fear of the unknown, and as Ian and Barbara walked down the dim passageways and half-lit corridors of the ship, past the all-enveloping inky black shadows, they relived all their childhood fears. Once again they were little children, climbing the stairs in the dark, not knowing what manner of unearthly horror awaited them at the top. The slightest sound they heard was amplified, perverted and transformed into the malevolent hissing of a goblin, or the mocking laughter of a devil. Behind every half-open door, an evil spirit was lurking, and the boogeyman made ready to leap out at them from any darkened corner. No, fans of the Space Babies, not those boogeymen. Page 45 has a casual ethnic slur about the, quote, inscrutability of the Sensorites. I may have intentionally left out a word there. This is 1987. People spoke like that. Nigel bounces back by giving us a characterization of the Hartnell Doctor on page 55 that you don't often see after he thinks Susan has left him in favor of the Sensorites. Quote, the old man was standing there, a strange look of hurt bewilderment in his eyes. Barbara had known the Doctor long enough to guess the cause. Beneath the Doctor's hard shell, he was in truth a deeply compassionate and caring man, and the person he cared most for in all the worlds he had ever visited was his granddaughter, Susan. And now she had been taken from him. For the first time in his life he felt utterly and completely alone. Shaking his head sadly, he followed Ian and Barbara through the doorway. Of course, there is still Hartnell under all that, so on page 57 the Doctor flashes a Sensorite, quote, a look so withering that a charging rhinoceros would have had cause for concern. The Episode 3 material takes up just 17 pages of a 137-page book. Chapter 5 removes some dialogue towards the end of the chapter, in the last scene on board the spaceship, between two Sensorite warriors and the TARDIS crew. But mostly the TV dialogue, full of philosophy, is still there in the book. Ian's wry observation that some Sensorites are happier than others seems almost a direct quote from Animal Farm, perhaps one of the earlier examples of Doctor Who quoting from the Western canon. And the pan of the Sensorites' city to open Chapter 6 is a good example of the best of the target range, adding literal color to a monochrome serial. Page 63, quote, bounded to the north and west by a range of yellow mountains, and to the south and east by a great blue lake and a lush forest, the Sensorites' city was a haven of beauty and serenity. The sun sparkled down on the domed buildings and crystalline towers of the city, which in turn reflected the sun's light in 1,000 different colors. Here and there, in secluded gardens, Sensorites would stop to talk, their conversations uninterrupted save for the noise of cascading fountains and the gentle songs of birds. Most magnificent of all the buildings in the city was the Palace of the Elders, a brilliant blue crystal dome, built on massive arches and towers, and soaring above all else in the city. It was here in this palace, in a small simply furnished chamber at the very apex of the dome, that the first and second elders of the Sensorite nation were seated in discussion. Chapter 7 tells us the color of Ian Chesterton's vomit. That's not exactly what I needed to know. This is the reason why the Doctor gives the stricken Ian salt water to drink early in Episode 4, though they weren't actually going to show vomiting on screen on TV in 1964. This chapter deletes the scene where the city administrator reveals to his underling his scheme to masquerade as the second elder. The story as written by Peter R. Newman assumes, and we know now this is an insensitive if not a racist trope, that all foreigners of a certain ethnicity all look alike. But the story just assumes this to be true, and builds a whole plot thread out of it. The book removes this scene, though still leaves in everything that follows. Here is what you missed.
The second elder has given the firing key to the chief of warriors. I saw him. Then the disintegrator is no longer of any use to us. How can we destroy these creatures?
I have placed our laboratory at the disposal of the man called the Doctor. See to it that he is given every cooperation.
Yes, sir. More weakness. These creatures are defeating us with smiles and gentle words. Our leaders listen and agree. Soon we shall all be slaves. What can we do? Bring the second elder to me, alone. The girl Carol gave me an idea. How would you recognize the second elder at a distance? By the sash he wears. Bring the second elder to me at the disintegrator room. Yes. We must match cunning with cunning.
Of course, if this plot thread is problematic, its corresponding strand, the city administrator's belief that the doctor's antidote to atropine poisoning is fatal, and that the disease itself is a hoax, hits very, very differently post-COVID-19. Many Target books feature their author trying to explain the essence of the doctor, and I've read many of those passages out on this podcast over the past nearly 3 years. On page 85, beginning of chapter 8, I'm exceptionally fond of Nigel Robinson's take. She wondered, Carol, just how old he really was. He could deliver abuse and criticism like any crotchety old man. Then the next moment he would approach a new and apparently insuperable problem with all the unbridled enthusiasm of a little boy. Beneath his thick white mane of hair his face was lined and ancient, but in his firm blue eyes there sparked the mischievous twinkle of youth, like two bright faraway stars in the night sky at home. Several minor changes to Chapter 10, covering the back half of the Episode 5 material. While Nigel doesn't change as much in the story as he will in later novelizations, he does make some fixes here. On TV, the Doctor admires the hand weapons given to him by the Sensorites for his second mission to the caves. A writer could submit that in 1964 and not have it seem odd. If memory serves me right, the Doctor on TV doesn't express a long-running distaste for guns for the first time until the Dalek invasion of Earth, produced a few stories after this. So in the book, the Doctor's admiring dialogue is transferred to Ian, and the Doctor instead states, quote, "I have never liked weapons at the best of times." Susan is given a moment of loneliness as John and Carol loudly declare their love for one another, and reflects that she belongs nowhere, and longs for the company of one her own age, setting up again Dalek invasion of Earth. Chapter 10 runs a full 15 pages, the longest chapter in the book, and includes more politics. The rabidly xenophobic city administrator, like any true fascist, is described as, quote, running the city on smooth and efficient lines. If the Sensorites were known to have trains, surely we'd learn that the administrator made them run on time. Chapter 11 is titled The Secret of the Caves, which is probably a coincidence, but is also the title of one of the earliest Hardy Boys novels, and the first Hardy Boys book that I read, a gift from an uncle on my 7th birthday. Speaking of which, I actually learned earlier today, talking to one of my cousins on the phone, that a different uncle, Uncle Bob, was a big fan of New Who and the first 3 David Tennant seasons, though he passed away very shortly after Journey's End aired, and it took 16 years for me to find out we even had Doctor Who fandom in common. Moral of the story, be nice to your uncles, people. The big change to Chapter 11. Well, 2 big changes. The Sensorites now have a holographic map of the aqueduct and tunnel system under the city, rather than, say, a tabletop model, which begs the question why the Sensorites located such a vital bit of their infrastructure in a dark cave system which they are genetically incapable of exploring. More importantly, Robinson has devised an organization called INNER, I-N-N-E-R, Interstellar Navigation, Exploration and Research, page 126, from which the surviving humans, led by John Bailey on TV, came from. Bailey, by the way, was also an evil of the Daleks and the Horns of Nimon, and we learned from Simon Gurrier on this show back in episode 105 that John Bailey performed in a dramatic production on the BBC's very first day of official broadcast. On TV, there is no INNER organization, just the word INNER, I-N-E-E-R, seen on a torn-off piece of uniform. The discontinuity guide in the mid-1990s posited, perhaps based upon the book, that INNER was an Earth-based interstellar exploration concern. But the other explanation I've seen, and I don't remember where this came from, possibly Jim Sangster, is that INNER is the back of the word engineer that would have appeared on the astronauts' uniforms. And of course, Hartnell spells it wrong on TV. Robinson adds a great benediction on page 139. Quote, "As they walked away, the doctor smiled inwardly to himself. There were those who said that he shouldn't meddle in the affairs of others, that he shouldn't become involved. At times he might be inclined to agree with them. But when his presence could generate such noble ideas in people, teach them the meaning of compassion and understanding, well, then perhaps this aimless wandering of his might have some secret purpose, after all." I like this paragraph because of its optimism about the Doctor's mission and worldview. The New Adventures novels of the 1990s were often written from a dark place, aging fans coming to terms with the loss of their TV show, where the Doctor's motives were often murky if not sinister. The Third Doctor's bravado was retconned as unnecessary paternalism, that sort of thing. But here in 1987 is a very optimistic mission statement for the show, one that would not be out of place right here in the 2024 season of Ncuti Gatwa. But the book does conclude with a pessimistic strand, and we'll come back to this when we reach the novelization of The Rescue. There's a bit of business to conclude episode 6 on TV, likely added on to the Peter R. Newman scripts by then script editor David Whitaker, where the Doctor vows to throw Ian and Barbara off the ship, which leads into the very next story, The Reign of Terror. That thread is absent here, and is replaced with 6 paragraphs of Barbara worrying about the Earthmen coming back to exploit the Sensorites after all, and steal their precious molybdenum. Barbara brushes aside her worries with the decidedly non-reassuring final sentence, page 143, quote, "Perhaps this time it would be different." Russell T. Davies himself sort of answers this question for us via the Sensorites' 21st century cousins, the telepathic Ood, who wind up enslaved and exploited by mankind. Perhaps the Earthmen will come back to the sense sphere after all, confirming Barbara's worst fears, and they won't just be coming for the molybdenum. Next time, on Doctor Who Literature, a rare treat indeed. The very next novelization after the Sensorites is the very next TV story after the Sensorites. Dennis Spooner's at times comedy and at times very uncompromising and gritty historical about the French Revolution, The Reign of Terror. We will have a multiple returning guest on the show next week to talk this through with me. That is next week on Doctor Who Literature. Thank you for joining me. The executive producer of Doctor Who Literature is David Barsky. This episode is produced by Jim Sangster and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, Jon Arnold. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Blue Sky and YouTube at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.